There's Mommy and Daddy, over there! I was shopping on the opening day of a new super department store when I came across a crying young girl of about 5 years old. She told me she'd lost her parents in the crowd of customers, and as I took her gently by the hand and led her to a nearby information desk to report a lost child, she suddenly tugged in the other direction. She squealed as she did, and when I looked at where she was pointing, there stood a man and a woman who looked like a married couple. I was relieved to have found her parents so quickly, but I was simultaneously shocked to see the man who would be her father. Why did he shock me? Because he was unmistakably my husband. My husband was at work that day, despite it being a holiday, so there was no way he could be here right then, could there? Unless... I matched my pace to the girls, and we hurriedly approached her parents. "Excuse me, I believe I've found your daughter." I let go of the girl's hand, whereupon she flew herself against her mother's legs. Startled, the woman turned around and then hugged her daughter very tightly. Then I turned to my husband, a smile on my face. This is the story of how I discovered my husband's secret, how deep it was, and how it allowed me to punish him accordingly. My full name is Natalia, and I'm half American, half Finnish, with my mother being from Helsinki. I'm 32 years old, and I work for a company that's very prominent in town for being an interior design industry. And I myself hold a managerial position in headquarters. My husband, Oscar, is 3 years older than me, and we've been married for 10 years when this story started. We were both financially independent, and our married life together was stable and quite content. However, we were having trouble conceiving a child even after a few years of trying, and I had started thinking about getting tested for infertility and, if need be, undergo treatment to improve our chances. Unfortunately, Oscar was not very enthusiastic about the idea and said to me on one particular occasion,
"I think we should just let nature take its course. As long as I'm with you, Natalia, I'm the happiest man alive."
"But now that your restaurant business is getting off the ground, it would be nice to have an heir to take over when you retire, wouldn't it?" For some context, Oscar was the sole proprietor and manager of a new local restaurant chain that introduced an interesting complexity of seafood dishes. He started his business 3 years prior and, by that point, had 5 restaurants opened in a relatively short period of time, and he expected to further expand his business in the future. But he said he has no intention of having an heir to inherit his business.
I don't have that old-fashioned mentality where I just need an heir. Honey, don't get me wrong, having children would be amazing, but I originally started this business with the intention of supporting the two of us as a family.
Is that so? I'd feel a lot better if you were okay with being more flexible about having kids, to be honest.
I'm more worried about the stress you might feel once we have kids. After all, you're the one who's kept me going this long. I think my top priority would be to repay you by giving you the best life I can offer you.
That's how my husband looked out for me. He had always been concerned about me because his business was in the red for a long time in its early days. I mentioned he got 5 branches opened within 3 years, but that was frankly a byproduct of his then borderline ridiculous sense of ambition. 4 out of those restaurants were poorly planned in terms of location, accessibility, and competition. And for 18 long months, he was stressing over his mistakes to the point where I had only seen him smile with genuine warmth and love once every couple of months. But I had business ideas for his enterprise myself, and alongside a few suggestions, I continued to support him financially. I also persuaded him not to close any branches many times when he tried to. Moreover, the interior of the restaurant was repeatedly renovated using my experience in the field, and, in the end, all of that paid off in the end. Hopefully, because of what I did to support him through a tough time, my husband would understand if I wanted to continue my work and support my own career. And thankfully, that's exactly what he did.
Because of your hard work and amazing contributions, Natalia, I was able to make my dream come true. I want you to continue doing the work you love, and don't ever let me or anyone else get in the way of that. Thank you, honey, from the bottom of my heart.
Thanks to Oscar, who accepts me for who I am, I was able to devote myself to my work with wholehearted passion. As a working couple, we respected each other in this manner, but he was off on weekdays when there were evidently fewer customers and more manageable meal hours, and I was off on weekends. This difference in when we had time off meant that we didn't have much time to spend together as we once did, and I sometimes felt lonely. Life went on in this manner, and I was working as usual when I was notified of a gargantuan order. A brand new shopping supercenter was to be built in my neighborhood, and our company was to be in charge of the interior design. I was given the task of designing the interior of the food court, the restaurants on the 4th floor, and the counters for popcorn and drinks for the movie theater. Thanks to my work on Oscar's restaurants, I was blessed with lots of experience in designing food shops. And this job gave me a chance to truly challenge myself with these skills of mine. I became more and more enthusiastic about my work. However, exactly around then, one of the stores Oscar owned was forced to close prematurely due to financial difficulties. This made me worried, but he said,
Well, I guess that store just had to go. It's painful that I lost quite a bit of assets, but hey, shit happens.
"Is the loss so bad?"
The other stores are doing pretty well.
"But I'm worried. We need to think about why the store had some financial trouble and make sure it doesn't affect the other stores."
Oh, come on. You don't have to let yourself worry about it that much.
"But there's a shopping center on its way up nearby. There will be more restaurants competing with you, so we have to think of a countermeasure."
That's enough, Natalia. Don't you think I know that already?
He was obviously offended because he apparently thought this matter was none of my business. He also seemed to be genuinely concerned about the shopping center, so I neglected to tell him that I was involved in its construction at work. After that, sales at his stores seemed to continue to decline, and he was having a hard time making money, but I refrained from expressing my opinion because I felt that if I said too much, our relationship would deteriorate more permanently. Eventually, the shopping center celebrated its opening day. There were special discounts and events to celebrate the opening, so I wanted to finish work early and go shopping. Perhaps my wish was granted, as my boss suggested I take a paid day off that very day. Since I had been in charge of designing the interior of the food department, I was very attached to the store and wanted to enjoy shopping as its customer on the day of its opening. Also, because of my job, I was given a lot of coupon tickets that could be used everywhere in the shopping center. But the problem was that it was far too much for me to use alone. In total, the coupons amounted to around $800. I decided to give them to my in-laws as a present. 15 hours before opening time, I went to my parents-in-law's house on my way home from work and presented the service tickets to Mrs. Sheen, my mother-in-law. She was delighted and said, "I've always wanted to go to that new shopping center, Natalia. You literally read my mind. What a great deal to get with all these coupons. Oh, I'm so happy." I got them thanks to my workplace, but I can't use them all by myself, and since Oscar's also off tomorrow, I thought we could go shopping together, the two of us. But then I thought, why stop there? Why don't you and Arthur come with us? "Oh, that sounds great, honey, but I don't want to interrupt your quality time together. You haven't been getting much of that, have you?" When Mrs. Sheen kindly refused my offer, Arthur, who until then had been in the bathroom, agreed as he came into the living room.
It's a grand idea, dear. But you probably know already that I absolutely hate large crowds. And there's bound to be one worse than the bowling alley incident of 1992.
Now that's a funny story and a half right there, but that's for another time.
We'll take our time and go at our own pace.
"And also, I'm sure you two will be more careful about having us old folk go shopping with them. You would be so excited you'd want to run around like a 13-year-old girl on Ritalin in the middle of a haunted house. I think you deserve to go crazy tomorrow." I bet you've caught by now that Mr. and Mrs. Sheen, unlike Oscar himself, are very eccentric folk, borderline crazy, I dare say, but in the best of ways. "Natalia, go have fun with Oscar. Don't worry about us. I'm sure he would love to go out with his wife once in a while." The reason they were so keen on Oscar and I going together as a couple was probably because they were worried about our relationship, since we were both working and stayed pretty busy. My husband was supposed to be on his regular day off that day, so I decided to ask him out. When he came home from work that night, I asked him if he was off tomorrow. That's when things didn't go as expected.
What? Tomorrow? I actually have to work tomorrow, and it's not a day off.
Really? I thought you were off on weekdays.
You know sales have been down lately, so I'll be working more on my days off from now on, it seems.
Oh, that's tough.
I'm sorry. Honey, did you want to go do something together?
I just thought if you and I had the same day off, we'd go to that new shopping center and have a look around. Maybe shop for some things?
Ah, damn. Sounds like an awesome plan. But, as I said, I have work. So,
I didn't want to make my husband feel jealous or uncomfortable, so I didn't tell him I was taking a paid day off to go shopping anyway. The next day, Oscar left for work early in the morning, and I woke up later than usual and got ready to go. I had planned to go with my husband and in-laws, but I ended up going alone. However, I was still excited as hell to go to the center because I was looking forward to visiting a place where I had been directly involved in my work. Although it was a weekday, it was still a national holiday, and it was opening day. The shopping center was very crowded. Many customers had come with their children, too. I was immersed in a sense of accomplishment that I had done a good job as I made my way toward the food court. I gazed at the tsunami of customers who were happily enjoying their meals with the interior I had designed. Then I heard a sad, out-of-place cry behind me. It sounded like a child, a little girl. And when I turned around, lo and behold, a little girl of about 5 years old was standing behind me, sobbing her eyes out. I quickly and gently approached her, crouched, and tapped on her shoulder. "What's wrong, dear? Why are you crying?" I spoke to her and she responded tearfully, "I can't find my mommy and my daddy." Apparently, she was a child who had lost her parents in the bustling crowd of customers. I decided to take her to a nearby information desk and ask for the announcement of a lost child. So I gently explained to her what I was going to do and asked her if she was okay with it. She nodded as she wiped her eyes, and I noticed two things. One, she had the most mesmerizing blue eyes I'd ever seen. They were so purely blue I gawked in awe for multiple seconds. She asked me if something was wrong. "Oh, nothing, sweetie. You just have very beautiful eyes." She smiled. The second thing I noticed was that she had a runny nose. So after I used a Kleenex to clean her up, I gently took her hand and walked toward the information desk. The girl, whose name was Shirley, stopped crying completely and started talking about her parents. "You know, my daddy has his own restaurant, and my mom used to work in one of the stores until I was born." "Really? What kind of store?" I asked casually, and Shirley told me the name of the store that her father owned. At first, I was very surprised to discover it was called Plat, which was a funny jeu de mots with the Thai word for fish and the French word for dish. But then I concluded that Shirley was the daughter of a family member of one of his old employees. "My daddy's always busy, so he's never home, but he's always with us on his days off." "He's always gone?" I was worried that Oscar's store might have a problem with its working hours when Shirley suddenly squealed in delight and tugged my hand in the opposite direction from the information desk. She pointed over yonder and shouted happily, "There's Mommy and Daddy! Over there!" When I looked at where she was pointing, there stood a man and a woman who looked like a married couple. I was relieved to have found her parents so quickly, but I was simultaneously shocked to see the man who would be her father. Why did he shock me? Because he was unmistakably my husband, Oscar Sheen. I matched my pace to Shirley's, and we hurriedly approached her parents. I let go of her hand, whereupon she flew herself against her mother's legs. Startled, the woman turned around and then hugged her daughter very tightly. "Oh my God, Shirley! I was so worried! You can't just leave me like that! Oh, thank goodness!" And then she looked at me and said, "I'm so sorry. Thank you so much. I hope she wasn't a bother to you." "No, not at all. You're her parents?" "Yes, I'm Mira, and that's my husband, Oscar." Lightning flashed in my head. I genuinely hoped it was a mistake or a misunderstanding, but when I heard her words, I felt as if my whole body had been doused in cold acid, and my fingertips were so cold that I could no longer feel them at all. I slowly turned my gaze toward my husband. He had betrayed me without a care in the world, despite everything I'd ever done for him, and his face was distorted by the tears that were welling up in my eyes by that point. He didn't notice me right away because he was hugging his daughter, who had tackled him to the floor.
Thank God you found us, Shirley. Oh, you have to promise me you won't do that again. I was so worried about you.
He lifted his head to look at the person who helped her find them, and as soon as he realized he was looking at my face, he froze immediately. He said in a muffled voice,
Why? What are you doing here?
The woman, called Mira, saw my husband's dismay, looked at him and me in turn, and then put her hands over her mouth as she said, "No way! This is your wife, Oscar? Oh, this is not going well, damn it." Her words seemed to me to be irrefutable proof that she knew Oscar was a married man. In other words, these two snakes had been conspiring together to deceive me. What the child said earlier about her father not being home all the time, what she meant was crystal clear to me now. Oscar was leading a double life in both my own home and that of his whatever she was. My voice was trembling when I said to him, "I found your daughter for you. Have a nice day." I was about to turn on my heel and leave immediately, trying to get away from the scene as quickly as possible. The cruel reality was too much for me to bear. But Oscar came after me, grabbed my arm, and said,
Wait, please. I'll explain everything. Then, hopefully you'll understand.
"You are darn right you'll explain everything. Do you really think I'm going to understand that you're cheating on me and even have an illegitimate child?"
I'm sorry I didn't tell you. But I couldn't because I didn't want to hurt you.
"What the frick are you talking about? Shirley can't be less than 5 years old. You deceived me with this woman for years." While my husband and I were arguing, Shirley clutching Mira's skirt while her mother started to sob, a familiar voice called out our names from nearby.
Oscar! Natalia! What? You guys fighting? This ain't the place to do that. Unless you want to be on... Oh, what was it called? Tic-tac?
"Tick-tock, honey. But more to the point, what's going on? Oh, my dear Natalia, you look so pale." To my great surprise, my in-laws were standing before us.
Dad? And Mom too? Why are you guys here?
"Why are we shopping, you mean? Oh, Natalia gave me coupons for a special offer. I persuaded Arthur to swallow his fear and come with me on this shopping escapade."
I gotta say, it was freaking worth it.
At that moment, Shirley, the poor darling witnessing all this, came up to her father and said,
"Hey, Daddy, Mommy's waiting for you. Let's go shopping, Daddy."
Mr. and Mrs. Sheen looked at her in surprise.
Daddy?"
"Who is this darling, Oscar?" Oscar panicked, trying to cover up the truth.
I'm not your father. Kids these days. Am I right?
He literally just gave his daughter trauma. She started to cry.
"You're my daddy. You're my only daddy."
My in-laws, sensing what was really going on, interrogated him. "You haven't been cheating on Natalia, have you? After how she helped you so much with your business?"
No. Natalia is my only wife. I can't live without her. I love her so much. But I also had a child with Mira, and I just couldn't leave her alone.
Turns out, my husband didn't want to have a child with me because he already had an illegitimate child elsewhere. What was worse, he wanted to keep it a secret from me so that we could go on with our marriage. In his eyes, I was the independent woman in his life who supported herself, and the woman called Mira, the mother of his daughter whom he was having an affair with, was the woman in his life who could create a family for him to support.
I love them both so much. I can't choose one over the other.
Stop. Just stop. You don't have to frickin' choose. I'm done with you. I immediately decided to break off this ridiculous marriage. I then decided to file a legal complaint to court and launched a divorce lawsuit against Oscar Sheen, who didn't want to agree to a divorce. It was obvious that my husband was to blame, but when it came time to go to court, he cowardly tried to justify his affair by claiming in his plea that our marriage was broken because I could never get pregnant. In other words, he stated I was clinically diagnosed as infertile, which caused him to look elsewhere to have children. If he could make me look like the bad guy in this and justify his affair, he wouldn't have to pay alimony. That was his goal. His claim was later deemed false. Despite his suggestions, I had gone to the hospital a few months prior to test my fertility. My official diagnosis was no abnormalities, signed by 2 separate qualified OBGYNs, and I presented this evidence to the court. I had taken the test on my own when I wanted to see if I could have children, and since Oscar was reluctant to follow through, I left it alone. The court deemed my evidence as conclusively positive, and my husband's claim was overturned. However, with how things were going, I was shocked to hear from my lawyer that it might take more than a year to get a divorce because that bastard was resisting admitting to being responsible for the divorce. But my in-laws convinced, or rather pressured him, to accept my requests. Thanks to their intervention, the divorce was finalized after about 5 court appearances, and I received $35,000 in alimony, which covered the $5,000 fee for court fees and my lawyer. Mira was a former employee of the restaurant and had been unemployed since the birth of her child, just as Shirley had said, so she could only provide an additional $15,000 in alimony on her part. Since I wanted to settle the matter as soon as possible, I agreed to that amount. After the divorce was finalized, Mr. and Mrs. Sheen, whom I still keep in contact with even today, visited my parents' home to apologize to me and my parents. Mrs. Sheen just broke down and kept crying and apologizing with enough sincerity that it genuinely moved myself and my own parents to tears as well. I felt sorry for causing my parents so much grief, and I was once again filled with anger at my ex-husband's betrayal. Mr. Sheen told me that during the trial, Oscar's business got worse and worse, and the financial difficulties he was facing became overwhelming. With no one else to turn to, he asked his parents for help, but they refused to give him anything. So Oscar did the unthinkable and brought in their own granddaughter as leverage to get a loan. That's when Mr. Sheen, in a deadly quiet voice, said,
"You betrayed not just Natalia's trust, but also your mother's, who thought she did a grand old job raising you. She's been so ashamed of you this past week, it could have killed her, son. You had an illegitimate child, whom you can't support. And any freaking pussy who refused to accept responsibility for causing their parents, wife, and child so much pain, and who fights and struggles for his own selfish reasons, Court is no damn son of mine."
Mr. Sheen handed him a Dear John letter and kicked him, his girlfriend, and his child out of the house. I felt so sorry for Shirley because the child was innocent. But when I asked the lawyer who handled the situation, he told me further details on what's happening between Oscar and Mira. So apparently, Oscar underwent a fertility test after the court battle and found out that he was deemed infertile with a very low chance of success in conceiving. He then began to doubt whether Shirley was really his own daughter. And as of now, he's constantly fighting with Mira because he wanted a DNA test to be done, while she refused. I don't think the two of them are in the same boat in their current predicament, and I don't think they have any right to blame each other, but I do feel sorry for Shirley, who will have to suffer because of her parents. That's why I decided to hire my lawyer again to create a bank account that would help Shirley McKinnon when she turned 20. My lawyer found the contact information of Shirley's grandparents, Mira's parents, who had also disowned their daughter after finding out what happened, and I was delighted to discover that they had the same idea. What was even better, Mr. and Mrs. Sheen also wanted to contribute to this trust account. Proceedings went smoothly, and it was calculated that, considering factors like inflation and 5% interest, Shirley McKinnon, the girl I'd helped just once, but who also helped me hugely in discovering the truth about Oscar, would have just around $400,000, all in her name, in 15 years on her 20th birthday. Hopefully, she'll put the money to use. As for me personally, a while after my divorce was finalized, I was offered an overseas training program by my company, and I decided to take it. Lo and behold, the training program is stationed in Helsinki, my mom's hometown. I'm so glad that I have a good opportunity to improve my knowledge and skills not only in a job that I love, but also in my mother tongue. I'm now practicing Finnish as I make efforts to make my life more meaningful. Wish me luck!